Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Analytics Mindset. In this case, I'm going to go over three certifications that I actually got together, but we are just going to get one video for each one because it will be way too much effort in one video and it would be actually too long for my own taste. These are three new certifications focused on AIs and agents that I got from Microsoft, and today I'm going to be talking about the Copilot and Agent Administration Fundamentals. As the name says, it's divided in two different sides. There is the Copilot part of things, and there is the Agent Administrator part of things. That also relies on Copilot, but it does not go straight into Copilot. After you pass the exam, you will get this certificate, and there is also a badge that you can get saying that you are certified. It is a fundamental certification. As you can see, I got it in January 30th, 2026. What is certification about? And I will, as always, put this in the video description so you can also see if you're interested in it. This one is basically how to support, secure, and protect an AI-enabled Microsoft 365 environment. And let's be honest here, everybody uses a Microsoft 365. You have Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Most likely Microsoft is going to give you Copilot too. There is something, no, it's not like our Data Cube previous certifications that we explore. Almost all the time, you are going to have some kind of Microsoft 365 in somewhere touch point. They are everywhere. Every company uses 365 in some reason. And Microsoft, as you will see soon, it's very, very reliant on putting that storage into Microsoft products in Copilot, particularly speaking. It's a beginning certification for the Azure AI services, and it falls under the AI category for obvious reasons. You will focus on how do you have the core services of Microsoft 365. For me, that was not really something I struggled, but like the new, because I am just not as familiar actually managing 365 environments. Security, identity, and access, data protection, and governance. And the fanciest part there is how to use Microsoft 365 Copilot and agents inside it. You will understand some concepts need to be done. So, for example, single sign-on. How can I do a single sign-on? How do I do conditional access policies? What security features are there for Microsoft in 365? And it is the AB-900 exam. I actually took it when it was beta, but now it is actually available. Generally speaking, you can take it without any kind of beta introduction. There is some material that we're going to go over that is around 6 hours to 7 hours, I would say. For me, it took me around 6 hours just because a lot of the material I already knew, especially on the single sign-on stuff and what security fundamentals Copilot has with this. You can get a demo too. Something important to know is that you will only have 45 minutes to complete this assignment. It is, as we talked before, for Microsoft certifications, it's a proctored exam. You cannot interrupt it, and you just need to go either to a testing center or you need to take it with your browser logged in, one of the two. You will basically have to take it without any. Microsoft allows you some resources outside that, but it's still not as easy as an open book exam. You may want to just prepare for that. It's offered only in English, and the price is $99. You will need to pay this unless you have any kind of discounts on it. You can also get sandbox on the demo and just try to see how the exam will be with interface. They do not have the actual practice assessment. That is where they actually give questions for it. That is very useful, but they don't have it for this yet. And with that, we're going to go over the actual material. This is the material that it's here for everything. It tells you what you need to know. You don't need to pay. There is guided options, and you also can take a class on it. I don't recommend it unless your employer is paying for that. That is a whole separate step. But as you can see here, you will have two different sites. And you will need to understand Microsoft 365 services. So it is not as easy as I want to learn everything about agents, because Microsoft really wants you to understand in the context of Copilot. Copilot is everywhere in this exam. You are going to need to know security features of Copilot and other things on how to manage not only Copilot, but also the rest of the Microsoft 365 suite. It doesn't require prior hands-on experience, but in my experience, I do manage a lot of intra AD groups. That was awfully useful when I was trying to figure out what was happening here. If you're not really that familiar with the concept of an AD group or how to secure a access, you may want to just do a quick glance at that before you hit this material. And as I said before, it's divided on two sides. You have Microsoft 365 administration that we're going to jump into a bit, and then you have Copilot and agent administration. So what is about here in Microsoft 365 administration? You have multiple things here, but the main part is you are going to explore the security foundations of Microsoft 365. This is where I actually got quite a bit of, I know this already, things. Zero trust, integrated security tools, threat intelligence, how do you define cyber threats, all those things just to keep a secure cloud environment. There is multiple sides to it, but you need to maintain your data secure and also the endpoints, aka the devices of the cloud. That is something that really is important to know for this. The cloud is everywhere, but you will need to understand that it's not only your device security, but also the endpoint. Whoever is using your cloud, there is a connection and you're connecting to it. How are we accessing this data? How are we doing all of this? You will see how security is implemented in 365, as you can see here. You will also get into Entra, as I mentioned before. And then Microsoft will walk you through most of the Microsoft 365 core services. You have almost every single one of them. I won't go in detail, but you can imagine it's Microsoft. Other ones that are not core but are still there, Microsoft Exchange, Teams, and SharePoint. And you are going to get questions related to those services. It is pretty good, at least for me, it helped me a lot. Every single Windows computer has Copilot. Yes, it is not the same as the corporate Copilot at the full license. But if you have a Microsoft 365 account, you can use a version of Copilot. You can still get some stuff done. And I would recommend doing that. That way you can actually look into it. Something that you may not also know is if you are not admin of role-based access control, there is a whole administration going behind that says this group needs to control this to give ownership to that. I grant AD groups, but I do not manage AD groups. It was very, very interesting for me personally to see how these things are defined in the backend. And finally, how do you protect and govern Microsoft 365 data? Copilot by default will use whatever policies you have in Purview or other security suites on 365. That is the main advantage of Copilot, and you need to know that deeply. If they ask you, this user has these credentials and it can do this and it cannot do this, what is Copilot going to be able to do and what's Copilot not going to be able to do? A good chunk of that is Copilot will be able to do whatever the user has access to. And then you have more complicated things. When you create an agent, we're going to go there into a second, you will also have as it saves your credentials as your agent, but it will, or the agent will only be able to do whatever you were able to do with your credentials, not what the other person, let's say it's an admin, can do on the other end. Purview is very important for this because it is that and graph that we're going to get into a second. E-discovery you need to know too as well, just because of how for internal threats, how it relates to security. And finally, there's a module assessment over here that I strongly recommend you to take the time and try to get it correct. And just to open this one more second on the Microsoft 365 Copilot security, you will see that you can, the main benefit of Copilot that differentiates it from other products is that you can access other things in 365. You can access all of these things from your instance of Copilot. And you will need to understand how you can mitigate those risks. Microsoft Graph is very important. It is the layer that allows you to access all of that. You need to know Microsoft Graph. You don't need to know how it's implemented, but you need to know that that's what's powering Copilot. Copilot is possible just because of Microsoft Graph. Without Microsoft Graph, there is no Copilot, there is no AI, and there is no agents whatsoever. But with that, we're going to go into the next section on the Copilot agent administration. So you build that from the previous one, and that's why I also recommend actually to do the previous one first and go in order and do this one after to see how you can boost productivity and security using Copilot and agents too. Agentic AI is very popular right now, so we need to adapt to it. You start by saying, okay, Microsoft 365 Copilot has agents. What do these agents do? What licenses do I need? That comes into the exam a lot of times because you can only do some things with some certain licenses. You need to know what are agents, what are the different Copilot licensing models, how do you plan to deploy those agents, how can you use them, how can you have other people using them. And you can also get a real use for cases for Copilot and other agents. Now, then you have a basic administrative tasks, things like how can I grant somebody a Copilot license? They do ask you that. Or can I just do it pay as you go? Which one is cheaper for me? My department wants to try and experiment with this Copilot agent feature. Do I need a full license or do I just need a pay as you go scheme? It really depends on your particular situation. And even though the exam doesn't test it a lot, it still tests it a little bit. And finally, you need to perform basic tasks for the agents themselves. You will create an agent in Copilot Chat and then use that to create a SharePoint agent. You can edit and test your agents, manage user access and permissions for agents, examine what approvals you need, what governance you need, and the agent life cycle. Sometimes you need to also dispose from agents after all of it. And again, the difference here is that Microsoft really focuses that the biggest Copilot advantage is Copilot is built in everywhere that Microsoft 365 is. It tries to label it as a benefit. You already have Microsoft 365. We're just adding Copilot on top of it. We can share with your organization. You have this agent in the Microsoft 365 Copilot chat. You can just use it here. You can use Copilot in Word. You can use it Copilot in Excel. That is something else that you need to know. You can do some things in Copilot in Excel or Word that you cannot do in Copilot Chat. Why can you do this in the app? Why you cannot do it here? How can you use Copilot in Teams? What kind of information Copilot can give you in Outlook? As a funny example, Copilot in Outlook can actually summarize your unread emails, but in my instance, in my work instance, that is not actually set up. Therefore, Outlook will just tell me, hey, I do not have access to your emails actually because of this policy. But you can copy and paste it. I'm like, well, that defies the whole purpose. I'm not going to just paste 40,000 emails and see what happens. I might as well just go and read through them. That is something that you need to be aware of. There is things that work in theory, but then your administrator or your instance might be different. Sometimes they restrict some capabilities. Sometimes they just decide to get rid of them. It's really up to the administrators, and unless you know the actual administrator, is a lot of guesses on, do I know if this capability is actually turned on? Microsoft is not going to ask you about your instance. Microsoft is going to ask you about what they recommend. They obviously recommend that I should see my unread emails and just have Outlook telling me what I missed. But again, I cannot do that in my instance. It's not set up. Therefore, I personally at work cannot do that. But when I get asked that question, can Outlook summarize your unread messages through Copilot? The answer is yes. It can, because that's what Microsoft puts as a best practice. That is something that you need to be aware of. There is the Microsoft best practices and however your instance is being managed and things turn on off in your particular instance, in your employer or your educational institution, if you're using that. Just be aware of that. That is something that caught me a little bit off guard, but it is, again, it is that way. Um, these are very customizable technology solutions. Therefore, there is going to be different needs. There is going to be different decisions that people make. And you just need to be ready to understand and answer what you need to answer. But with that, I hope that you found this video interesting. The world of agents is actually very interesting. I think it's a little bit too overhyped, but agents for sure can do a lot, especially with the more complex models that based on them. And they do allow a lot of augmentation of work. But yeah, as always, I would appreciate a like, a comment, and any feedback you may have. And let me know if you actually are thinking on getting these new certifications. I will cover the two of them very soon as well. Thank you.